Hello, I'm Sonia Weinstead, and this is an episode of Filmmaker Focus. Today we're interviewing Dan Johnstone, creator and executive producer of Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed. Thanks for joining us, Dan.
Thanks for having me.
So what was the initial spark for Hillsong, a Megachurch Exposed?
I love sneakers. I love fashion. I love music. I love pop culture. And I grew up in a religious household. I became interested in Hillsong because it was the first church that I'd ever seen that combined all those factors. When I started to see Hillsong and I started to read about it, it was really the first church that I had ever seen that had crossed over, that had gone from religious culture to pop culture. And I was just fascinated by it. I mean, I just thought it was like an incredible story.
And so when you have a project of this scope, like how do you even begin to prep for it?
With baby steps. You prep by reading as much as you can, talking to as many people as you can, and really just trying to absorb it. Hillsong is very public. They are on Instagram. As you'll see in the documentary, they have over 2 billion views on YouTube. So their presence is very prominent. And really, that was the first place to start, was to start looking at that world that they're projecting.
Because of, this sort of sensitive nature of, the fact that you're investigating Hillsong, how did you determine the best approach to take for this docuseries?
Anytime I get into a series or into a subject matter, I'm very careful, and I tell this to the team, is you can never force a story upon itself. You have to listen to what the story says back to you. And the best approach will speak to you. I went into it with enthusiasm. And my team had enthusiasm about it. And we wanted to learn about it because it is a cultural phenomenon. And no other church has done what they've done. And so the approach is wide-eyed and open-minded, really.
Let's talk about this idea of Hillsong Church being a cultural phenomenon. Can you go a little bit deeper into that, like what you mean by cultural phenomenon?
Yeah, cultural phenomenon in that it's a true crossover church. I mean, America and the world at large has had megachurches before. We've had these big movements. But Hillsong was the first one that ended up selling out concert venues and was on the nightly news and had all these celebrity attachments. It truly became part of culture, and not just church culture. It became part of pop culture.
They bring you in with culture. And so getting it in with music and our age group, our clothes, I mean, everyone started dressing the exact same way as Carl Lentz.
I mean, would you say that you guys were idolizing might be a strong word?
It is a very great word. Idolizing is a perfect word because Carl Lentz became a cult leader to a bunch of people like me that ended up trying to follow into this thing of, I want to be big and powerful and cool and have people want to be on fire for something and lead people.
Every church wants a big swelling movement like that. But this Hillsong did it. I mean, you see it in New York City. I mean, it was kind of mind-blowing and just a fascinating story.
Hillsong's main venue in New York City is a concert venue in Manhattan, Irving Plaza.
My name is Janice Fagata. I was a member of Hillsong NYC for 7 years, I think. And this is where we first had church. So Saturday night, there'd be a concert. So on Sunday morning, it was just basically coming in early, turning this bar, this nightclub, into a church. There would be a long line going that way, at least to the end of the block, and usually wrapping around. And so having that kind of line there, and at a venue like this, it looks like it's something cool. It's New York, and everybody wants to be part of whatever's going on. So a lot of people, I mean, just the curiosity, yeah, it definitely worked.
I was a New Yorker, and I just remember those Sunday morning lines in front of Irving Plaza. I had no idea what it was about.
Yeah, for me, the only line I'd ever seen at church is in the parking lot because, they're notoriously difficult to park in. That's fascinating to me. And people remember it. People know about the lines around the block. That's a cultural phenomenon to me.
So can you talk about how Hillsong used music to create this global brand as well as a revenue stream for the ministry?
Music is the key, I think, to Hillsong. There's viral videos shared on Instagram that I will watch them and be like, oh, this is a Hillsong song. Their music is elegant, it is rich, and it is effective.
Their songs are better than everyone else's, and they can kind of infiltrate into other churches by having good music. The goal of Hillsong is to stay current. It's making music that you know people will like. And instead of refurbishing your grandma's old hymns, it's something new and shiny.
Their music plays at the same stadiums that Taylor Swift plays at. And I think not a lot of people realize that that music just has spread quicker than anything, like wildfire.
You can go and see Hillsong United in a stadium tour. It's the same arena that Taylor Swift plays when she comes to town, right? It's a huge experience, and it's a high production value, and ticket sales are really high, and you can make a lot of money there.
It's a money-making machine. It has one purpose: to get hold of as much of your money as they can.
Hillsong consistently says we're not a business, we're a church, but they behave exactly like a big Fortune 500 company.
In terms of the business model, it's treating people as consumers.
Music is moving, and music connects a lot of people. And I think in looking into Hillsong, that part of their phenomenon was that music, was harnessing that power of the music.
I remember one of the interviews in Hillsong talked about the fact that it's tested on the audience on Sunday mornings, and the fact that it's basically the chords are created to evoke these sort of emotional feelings out of the listener. So do you agree with that?
I've experienced their music, and it is powerful. I have heard their music in other venues outside of Hillsong, and when you're listening to it in a crowd and it is these soaring vocals, yeah, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. I don't think anyone could deny that.
It's made to make you feel something. They want you to feel the presence of God within you. But it's easy to mistake emotional manipulation for a movement of God, right? Are you crying because the Lord is staging some kind of intervention in your life, or are you crying because the chord structure is built to make you cry?
Let's talk about Brian Houston. Would you call him a spiritual entrepreneur and Hillsong as a money-making machine?
Elle Hardy in the documentary uses that term.
Hillsong's much more about selling you things. They sell you CDs, obviously, first and foremost. They sell you self-help courses. They sell you books. They sell you inspiration to live in this world, and they're obviously very good at it. Brian realized that it's all about the product that you're creating, and it's all about the brand. He's a spiritual entrepreneur. He's effectively the CEO of a spiritual company.
I think Brian had a tremendous vision for what he wanted the church to be. And that's part of the reason of being interested in this story, is that he started this church from a small church in Australia and suddenly is on national news in America and is in multiple countries and has multiple churches. And he had a vision, and he built on that vision. And we're talking about it today.
It's amazing how he really has taken Hillsong to the next level. I mean, it is a global phenomenon. Did you want to include interviews with Brian Houston and Carl Lentz?
We reached out to Brian and Carl a lot. They declined to be involved.
But you were able to talk to past church members and ex-volunteers, and you really got some very moving personal stories. And how did those personal stories shape the docuseries?
When I started the documentary, I said that regardless of a religious journey, gospel music it affects me. It hits me in the heart. And the theory, there's many theories behind it, but for me, the theory of gospel music is many voices united as one, that you exalt to a higher power. And I took that motif and that metaphor and brought it to my team to say, this documentary is made with these voices. They are the quote unquote choir. They are the voices that we are trying to unite and to resonate and find that story in that. So their stories are everything. They are the lifeblood of the documentary. And in some cases, it's the first time they had ever spoken out or first time they've been heard. And that it moving, humbling, inspiring, difficult at times. But yeah, they're the choir. They're the voices I wanted to unite.
Did you expect to be moved by some of these personal stories?
I was moved more than I was expecting. I think the depth and in the feelings that people have about their experiences was at times more than I was expecting. My team was expecting, Lauren and Kevin. And we trusted each other. We trusted who was sitting in front of us. And it was a very humbling experience.
I myself was moved by some of these, sort of testimonials. And, it really has to be difficult to open yourself up and make yourself vulnerable to people you don't really know and to tell your story. So how, as a filmmaker, do you approach earning their trust to get people to open up?
Honesty is probably the most important part. I tell them my story. I tell them who I am. I tell them who my team is. And then it's a process, and a humbling one. I use that word often, but you can only be as good as that trust that you create. And it's important to understand that people are sharing difficult things and to be aware of that and to let them go through it.
What do you think is Hillsong's appeal to both past and present members?
My mom would laugh at me that I've always been obsessed with shoes. She would say that I would meet people from the ground up. And like when I was a child, we went to a store once in Southend, which is where I'm from in Essex. We went into a store and we came out and she wasn't paying attention. And then she looked down and I had just taken two shoes off the side and just put them on my feet, giant shoes that didn't fit me. So I always joke that the appeal for me, and I can really speak to myself, is that if I saw a pair of shoes that I loved, like a sneakers that I loved, I would follow those sneakers, and those sneakers lead me into the church. And that's what Carl did. He took this persona and this charisma and this fashion sense, and he led you into the church. And then you have the music, and then you have the message. Everything about that is powerful. And when you have a superstar like Carl, it's magnetic.
What about its celebrity members? What do you think the draw was for them?
I don't know what it is about the celebrities, but I think it is the message.
Hillsong comes along and offers this place where you can be religious but not stuffy. There's this idea of like, oh, you've got a sex tape. Cool. You love Jesus. Even better. Like, there's this malleable thing about Hillsong. On the other side, you've got Hillsong, which is looking for a way to be in the media. Celebrity does that reliably every time.
I said that Hillsong was a crossover church. The crossover is music, fashion, culture, religion. And I think all of those things together is a powerful message.
But do you think that the church leveraged its celebrity members to mainstream the church?
I can't speak to that, but I think that Justin Bieber is a megastar. The power of somebody like that going to one of their services, that speaks for itself. I mean, that's just powerful.
Let's talk about Carl Lentz. Big personality, charismatic, all of those things, fashion conscious, good-looking guy. So, can you talk a little bit more about how you think Carl Lentz was able to draw such huge audiences to his sermons?
I think Carl Lentz is the reason we're having the conversation. I don't think Hillsong is. He is the catalyst for change and catalyst for crossover.
He was always about the tattoos, the trendy stubble, jeans, leather jackets, that sort of thing. And it shows a different way of doing things, and it makes you feel that your belief system is valid in the modern world.
Carl Lentz stands next to megastars like Justin Bieber and looks no different, does not look out of place, stands next to Oprah, stands next to Justin Bieber, stands next to the Kardashians, these, incredible basketball players. His magnetism, his charisma, his command of the stage, he is a superstar.
One of the aspects that you touch on in the film is the fact that Brian Houston leveraged Carl Lentz's charisma and appeal to expand the church, to draw more people in, to make the church more mainstream. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Brian has this vision. And from the stories that we are told, New York and America is part of that vision. New York is an interesting place to start a church. We talk about it. And I love the line that there's not a lot of saints in New York, but there's a lot of sinners. And it was this sort of funny turn of phrase that we use in the doc.
It's very interesting when people talk about, planting a church in the middle of New York City. Literally, a very small Christian population. So why? Well, there may not be many Christians, but there's certainly plenty of sinners.
I don't think you can go into New York City unless you have a call. And I think Carl became that catalyst for change. He was that quickening.
Ben Kirby started an Instagram account called Preachers and Sneakers. Can you talk about Ben and why he's integral to the story?
Ben was probably one of the most impactful interviews we did in the whole documentary.
A few years ago, I started an Instagram account showing megachurch pastors wearing expensive sneakers. And then in 4 weeks, I had 100,000 followers, not knowing what I stepped into, but knowing that there was something important happening because people were freaking out. It seems like these guys are making serious cheddar off of a role that is funded by sacrificial donations of people that are trying to further the kingdom. And so the sneakers were just the way into that.
He is known for Preachers and Sneakers, but the depth of which he understands church life and pop culture life is far greater than that Instagram account. He has lived in the church. He is a church member. He goes to church every week. He's a member of his church in Texas. And I think in being at the forefront of that, where pop culture meets church culture, he gets a vision of both sides.
I'm pointing out the standard and saying, collectively, are we all okay with this? As Christians specifically, maybe this is the best way to do church. Like maybe this is the best way to treat our pastors by showering them with gifts and private jets and courtside seats and all that kind of stuff. But have you ever questioned if it actually is the best way?
And he, reads some of the lines that he gets in the documentary of people that just attack him for being this and that, and for, having ulterior motives. And so I think in the documentary, I wanted Ben to have a chance to speak to that other side. He has a book. His book is fascinating. His book, I would encourage everyone to read it. And we had a meaningful, impactful conversation where I think he got to express some things about this collision of cultures that was far more impactful and far more grand and deep than all of us were expecting.
If you believe that people actually have a chance of going to hell, and you're worried about how your ass looks on Instagram, it's just so obscene. You're saying it is the most important thing above anything. I don't know why I'm getting emotional about it. It's like if you believe all this is true and you're treating it like a game, that seems pretty foolish. And you're basically saying that you don't respect or appreciate how grave the stakes are like how large the stakes are.
Can you describe a moment in the film that you found particularly disturbing or moving? And what was it about that scene that especially, was compelling for you?
There are two moments that stick out with me. One I just mentioned with Ben, where he was talking about what his intentions were and his questions that he asked. And like a wave of emotion, it crept up on him. He verbalized, I'm not sure why I'm getting emotional, but it's because we were going deep. And then all the stories are personal and moving. Sometimes you hear a story and you repeat it back to that person and they hear it for the first time and it causes a reaction in them. The person that happened with the most profoundly was Noemi.
That it hurts to look back. Because I was used. They took someone who was vulnerable, who wanted just to fit in and find a family, who was in a new city, who wanted to thrive in this thing that I had been raised in, which was church. And they used that so that they could get more people through the doors that looked like me and who were going through the same things as me, to get the money out of them and the seats out of them and more volunteers out of them, more free labor. And if I were to go back and tell myself that, I probably would disregard what I was telling myself because I was so into it. I was so embedded in it. I wanted to believe it.
How does that make you feel when you think back to that?
Damn. I need a minute.
Noemi is she's a deep thinker. She has done a lot of processing. She has come out of this journey. And in telling us about that journey, we just repeated a part of it. And she said the words, I've never thought about it that way. This is something that she's been thinking about and processing for a long time. And she suddenly heard it in a different way. Sometimes when you'll be doing an interview, and we were doing that interview in a huge church, suddenly that massive church became like a telephone box. Everything felt very small because we were in that moment. That happened a couple of times during the documentary, but those are the moments that struck me.
What surprised you most while you were making this film?
The most surprising thing is the depth and the breadth of the emotion that people feel from these experiences.
They make you feel so good, and before you know it, you're right in it and you're committed. But unfortunately, there's something more sinister under the surface. I found when I left, I genuinely believed I was the problem. Sorry, I'm getting a bit emotional.
With the case of Jacqueline had an experience when she was in her formative teen years. I think she was like 19 years old. And she still talks about that event today.
When we talk about Carl and purity, wolf in sheep's clothing is honestly the mental picture I get. To hear that person that shamed me about purity and sex had his own problems, I don't know. It is hard. It is literally the definition of a hypocrite.
Seeing how those emotional experiences, those formative experiences within the church and within that culture weave their way through their lives, I was not expecting it to be as deep and as profound as it is.
What do you want audiences to take away from this docuseries?
I think I just want people to listen, that the people that are sharing these stories are sharing these stories because they haven't been heard before. because they haven't felt comfortable in sharing them before. If you do nothing else, take a few moments after you've watched it and just think about it, and think about their voices and put yourself in their shoes.
What was the most difficult aspect of producing this docuseries?
Outside of COVID? The difficult thing is these are personal stories. They are emotional stories, and they are difficult stories. You have to listen a lot, and you have to hear people and earn people's trust. Anytime you tell a personal story, it's difficult. It's coming from deep within, and so yeah, that is always the difficulty. And then the production woes of it being COVID still was always difficult.
How do you start shaping this story with all this footage that you have?
Time, dedication, and some sleepless nights, I think is how I would describe it. I'll go back to something I said earlier, that you have to let the story speak to you. You can't enforce anything on the story. So I think the process is take your time, listen to what people are saying, listen to experts, listen to personal testimonies, and the story will speak to you. It is a long process. There are people that spend hours and days just thinking about it. I would get text messages in the middle of the night where somebody would remember something from a documentary or from an interview, and you have like a vision of maybe we can tell the story like this.
Filmmaking is a laborious process. Like, what keeps you motivated?
It is a laborious process, and it is a difficult process, and there is a million reasons to not do something, and you can feel doubt and you can feel lost. But I always try and go back to childhood wonder of that I would do this anyway. If it wasn't my career, I would do it anyway. You're doing this for a reason, and the reason is amplifying voices. The reason is telling stories. The reason is connecting people. That if you are a filmmaker, that is in your DNA. And if ever that wavers, it's temporary. It'll come back.
To follow up on that, what do you think makes you unique from other filmmakers? What's your sort of special sauce?
If it is a story that you know, I can tell it in a way that you have not heard. And finding that other side of everything. And that fundamentally everything I do is driven by emotion. My entire career up until this point, I was always told, point blank, you're too emotional. You're too emotional. You're too emotional. And I took that to heart, and I would try and get rid of it, try and stop it. And then all the success I've had is when I just said to myself, I'm an emotional person. We live in an amazing time right now where the barrier of entry to tell stories is almost non-existent. You can do it with your iPhone. You can get right into it. But that does mean that you have to find signal in that noise. And that means you have to work a little bit harder. You have to work. It means that you have to be more dedicated to what you are doing in finding those emotional stories, in finding those voices, in uniting those voices, in elevating those voices. And I sort of have a joke, but it's also true, is that all I do is I just want to make you cry. And you can cry out of joy, hopefully, and you can cry out of catharsis and sadness. But it's the same drive. I want to move people. And as a filmmaker, that is where I get all my source, I suppose.
When you look back on your initial objective for this film, do you think you achieved what you set out to do?
I think the power of the documentary hopefully speaks for itself in that uniting these voices, hearing these stories, there was no objective other than let's hear it. Let's hear what people have said, and let's live through it. And so, yeah, I think we achieved more than I could have imagined. The amount people shared, the amount that we learned, the amount that we heard, beyond what I was expecting. And like I said, humbled, inspired, energized by it.
What did you learn specifically from this film? Like, did you gain new insight that you didn't have prior to making this film?
Man, probably asked myself that in 5 years. The depth of feeling. I mean, just to be empathetic, despite many differences of where people are from, what they do, one of the things that makes Hillsong a cultural phenomenon is this, it unified people under, a belief. And I want to connect, and I want to move forward. And so I think I just learned a little bit more humility. I am doing the job I've always dreamed of doing, and am grateful and thankful and humble that people allow me into their lives to tell these stories and amplify these voices.
Well, thanks so much for joining us, Dan, and talking a little bit more about Hillsong, a megachurch exposed. We're really grateful that you took the time to talk about this amazing docuseries. Everyone should go and see it.
I hope they do, and thank you for talking about it. I always have to say thank you to Discovery Plus and the team that worked with us. I mean, it was a wonderful experience, and I think we made something that I am incredibly proud of, and I think the people that made it are incredibly proud of, and I hope people do see it.